Not the hesitant kind that comes from someone unsure if they should be there. This was firm. Intentional. Like whoever stood on the other side believed they belonged. I wasn't expecting anyone. My apartment was dark except for the kitchen light I'd left on out of habit. I padded toward the door, heart already racing for no good reason, or maybe for every reason I didn't want to admit. I looked through the peephole. At first, all I saw was a shadow, tall, broad-shouldered, shifting restlessly. Then he stepped into the light of the hallway. And I froze. He was gorgeous. Early 30s, messy dark hair. Black t-shirt that clung to him in all the right ways. He had this lazy, reckless confidence about him. Like someone who didn't second-guess much in life. His brow was furrowed, clearly confused, maybe a little annoyed. But I opened the door anyway. He blinked, startled. Oh, shit, wrong door. I thought this was Jenna's place. 3B? I should have just said no. Should have smiled politely and closed the door like a normal person. But instead I tilted my head and said, Jenna's upstairs. This is 2B. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly embarrassed. Sorry, I'm new here. Visiting. Got the wrong floor. You look like you could use a drink before climbing more stairs, I said, stepping aside. He looked at me surprised, hesitated, and walked in. That was the moment everything tilted. I don't normally invite strange men into my apartment at midnight. But he didn't feel like a stranger. Not the way he looked at me, like I was more than just a detour. Like something about me made him forget what door he was supposed to knock on. We sat on the couch, each with a glass of cheap red wine, and the conversation was effortless, charged. His name was Adrian. He was visiting from Austin, helping his cousin move. One night in town. Just one night. I could feel it in the way his knee brushed mine. In the way his gaze lingered when I laughed. The air between us was thick with a dare neither of us was ready to speak aloud. And when he stood to leave, finally I stood with him. Close. Too close. He looked down at me. I could feel his breath. The hallway was just behind him, freedom only steps away. But he didn't move. And neither did I. He didn't kiss me that night. Not then anyway. He stood there, close enough that I could smell the faint musk of his cologne and something else, like rain on pavement, even though it hadn't rained in days. His gaze dropped to my lips, then flicked back up to my eyes. The tension was unbearable. But he just said, "Thanks for the wine," and walked out. I closed the door behind him, hand still on the knob, heart beating like I just sprinted a mile. But it wasn't the first time I'd seen him. I remembered suddenly 2 days earlier, the way you do when your mind's trying to make sense of fate. I'd been coming back from a late grocery run, arms full, headphones in, keys clutched between my fingers. I almost didn't see him, leaning against the mailboxes in the lobby, arguing on the phone with someone. His voice was low, tight with frustration, but his face, God, his face was calm. Like no argument could really touch him. He looked up as I passed. Just a glance. But it held. He watched me the whole time I fumbled for my key. I remember because it made me self-conscious. And because once I stepped inside my apartment, I leaned against the door and closed my eyes, smiling like a teenager. Now, sitting on my couch where he'd just been, wine still in my glass, I realized that knock wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment I stopped pretending I wasn't waiting for it. He hadn't come looking for me. But he'd found me anyway. And I wasn't done with him. Not even close. I didn't expect to see him again. But the next night, just as I was settling into bed with a book I had no intention of actually reading, I heard it. Another knock. Softer this time. Slower. I opened the door and there he was. Adrian. No excuses this time. No mention of Jenna. Just standing there with a six-pack and that same look in his eyes, like he'd been thinking about what didn't happen as much as I had. "I owe you a drink," he said, raising the beer. I stepped aside again, already trembling a little, already knowing this night wouldn't end the same. We didn't sit on the couch this time. We stood in the kitchen, leaning against opposite counters, the soft hum of the fridge the only background noise as the silence between us stretched and thickened. His eyes kept finding mine, then dropping, then finding them again. "I couldn't stop thinking about last night," he finally said, his voice low, almost hoarse. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because the air was electric now, every breath charged, every shift of our bodies deliberate and slow. I could feel it, the gravity between us pulling stronger by the second. He crossed the kitchen. Not quickly. Not confidently. Like every step was a test, he wasn't sure I'd let him finish. But I didn't move. And when he reached me, inches away, breath brushing my cheek, he stopped. His hands didn't touch me, but they hovered like he was waiting for a sign. I didn't give him one. I just looked at him. Let him see everything I wasn't saying. Every ache I tried to push down. Every rule I was about to break. Then finally one of his hands slid to my waist. I sucked in a breath. He didn't pull me in. Just held me there like he needed to memorize the shape of me before crossing a line we couldn't uncross. His thumb moved barely. But that was enough to light a fire under my skin. And when he whispered my name, just my name, it felt like the start of something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but knew I wouldn't stop. Not now. His hand on my waist didn't move. Not really. But something inside me did. I don't know if it was the way he looked at me, not just hungry, but like he was already wrecked, or the way the room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, as if even the walls were holding their breath. But something in me gave in. I leaned into him just barely, and that was all it took. He closed the space like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it. His mouth didn't crash into mine. It hovered. Brushed. A slow, uncertain promise. And when it finally landed, I felt it everywhere. In my spine, in my knees, in the places no one could see but he somehow already touched with just his breath. His lips were warm, tentative at first, like he was still asking for permission with every inch. I gave it without a word. My hand slid up his chest, over soft cotton and muscle, and rested at the base of his neck. I could feel the tension in his shoulders, barely held back, trembling under restraint. When his hands gripped my hips firmer this time, I gasped. Not from surprise, from need. We moved together like we'd done this before in another life. Or maybe just a dream we'd both forgotten until now. My back hit the counter and he broke the kiss long enough to look at me, really look at me. His pupils were blown wide. His jaw tight. His chest rising faster now. And in that breathless space between touch and surrender, I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Not because he didn't want this, but because it was already too much. I shouldn't, he whispered, but his hands didn't move. Then don't, I said, and pulled him in again. We didn't speak after that. There was only breath and hands, and the slow, unhurried unraveling of boundaries that had never really stood a chance. And when his mouth found my neck, just below my ear, I swear I forgot my own name. I don't remember how we got to the bedroom. One second I was against the counter and the next we were stumbling backward through the shadows, still kissing, still chasing that invisible thread pulling us closer, tighter, deeper. My hands were in his hair, his breath on my collarbone, and every place his lips found felt like a confession I didn't know I'd been keeping. Clothes slipped away. Not in some frantic, careless way, but slowly, almost reverently. Like each layer peeled back a piece of resistance. A doubt. Past we weren't talking about. When his fingertips brushed my bare shoulder, I shivered. Not from cold, from the weight of the moment. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Thick with things neither of us dared say out loud. He looked at me then. Really looked like he wasn't sure I was real. "You're beautiful," he said softly, like the words surprised him. And something in me cracked. Because this wasn't supposed to be tender. This was supposed to be lust, mistake, midnight impulse. But now his hand was on my waist again, and his thumb was drawing soft circles into my skin like he was trying to calm a storm, or maybe stir one up. I pulled him closer. His chest against mine, breath hitching. The first full press of our bodies was lightning, quiet but blinding. My legs trembled before I even knew I was shaking. His hands moved with a slowness that felt like reverence, his mouth trailing down my shoulder, across my collarbone like he was memorizing me. Not with his mind but with his skin. I tilted my head back, eyes closed, breath shallow. And in that moment I didn't care about consequences or questions, or the fact that this man had knocked on the wrong door. He was here now, and I was letting him in every possible way. I don't remember who kissed who next. I just remember the way his breath changed, heavier like he was holding something back and losing the strength to keep it in. And the way my own chest rose to meet his, instinctual, helpless, like my body had already decided long before my mind caught up. There were no words. Just the sound of skin brushing skin, the rustle of sheets, the creak of the mattress as we sank into each other. Not urgently but completely. His hand slid along my thigh, slow and sure, and when I shifted under his touch, a soft sound escaped my lips before I could stop it. He paused, looked at me. His gaze wasn't hungry now. It was something else. Something deeper. Like he knew exactly what he was doing to me, and couldn't believe I was letting him. And the truth was neither could I. Because I'd built walls. High ones. But here I was, melting beneath a stranger's hands, dissolving into heat and breath and sensation so full, so overwhelming, I didn't know where I ended and he began. His mouth found the hollow beneath my jaw, and I arched into him, my fingers clutching his back, dragging across muscle I hadn't even realized I'd been craving to touch. It wasn't fast. It wasn't frenzied. It was slow, devotional, like time had bent around us. Like the world outside that room had vanished and left nothing but this. The press of skin, the rhythm of breath, the quiet confessions made in silence. I felt him shake once, just a tremor, when my hands explored the curve of his waist. And I realized in that moment he wasn't immune either. He was just as lost. We were tangled in something bigger than lust. Something that felt dangerous. Because it wasn't just physical. It was surrender. And I was giving in completely. The room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that feels full, like silence after a song that left you breathless. I was still lying beside him, my arm draped across his chest, my skin buzzing in the afterglow of something I couldn't quite name. He hadn't said much. Neither had I. But his fingers kept tracing slow, absent-minded circles along my spine. And every time they did, I felt like I was coming undone all over again. Not from desire but from something softer. Something scarier. He turned his head slightly, his voice barely a whisper. I don't usually do this. I almost laughed. Yeah, I said, me neither. But we both knew that wasn't the full truth. Because this, whatever it was, didn't feel like a one-night thing no matter how much we pretended it could be. There was something terrifying in how natural it felt. Like my body already knew his. Like my walls had dropped the second I opened the door, and some part of me had been waiting for him without realizing it. He looked at me then, not with hunger, not with guilt, but with something dangerously close to tenderness. And it hit me. This was the part no one warns you about. Not the heat, not the tension, not even the kiss. It's the way you start to care. Even when you shouldn't. Even when it's built on nothing but impulse, red wine, and coincidence. I propped myself up on one elbow and looked at him, half expecting regret to settle behind his eyes. But it didn't. He just reached up and brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, slow and gentle like it mattered. And I suddenly wanted to ask him everything, where he grew up, what he was afraid of, who broke his heart last. Instead I whispered, "You knocked on the wrong door, remember?" He smirked, starting to think it was the right one. He stayed until dawn. Not because we planned it. Not because we talked about it. Just because neither of us moved. At some point I dozed off with my head on his chest, lulled by the rhythm of his breathing, the safety in his arms. A safety I had no right to feel with someone I barely knew. When I woke, the light was soft and gold, creeping across the sheets. And he was gone. The pillow beside me was still warm. No note. No goodbye. Just a faint trace of his scent on the blanket and the quiet, unbearable weight of reality settling back in. I lay there for a long time. Not sad. Not exactly. Just stunned by the silence. And how loud it felt. He never came back. Never knocked again. I never asked around about Jenna, never tried to find out more. I didn't want to. Because what we had, that hour, that night, wasn't meant to survive daylight. It wasn't designed for explanation or definition. It was a detour. Crack in the routine. A beautiful, impossible pause in the middle of an otherwise ordinary life. But sometimes even a pause can change everything. I still think about him. Not in a hopeless romantic way. Not even in a sexual one. But in the way you think about a storm that rolled in out of nowhere, fierce, unexpected, and gone before you had time to take cover. He knocked on the wrong door. And for one night, I let him all the way in.